Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to another edition of Brownsville Matters. I'm excited to have Mayra Cruz here because she's the only person I've ever known who actually designs shoes. And not only that, she went to Italy to learn how to design shoes. And so that's an interesting pedigree, Mayra. How did that come about that you went to Italy?
Well, thank you so much for the invitation. I'm so glad to be here. Big fan of this show and everything that the Brownsville Society for the Performing Arts does. And so the whole shoe thing started my senior year of college, actually. I took a summer. I always worked part-time in college. And so my last summer there, I decided to just focus on art the full summer. So I took full-time art studio courses. So that was 8 hours every day. And so
what kind of classes were those?
I was taking painting, and I can't recall the other class.
Like sketching, drawing, that sort of
but
thing.
I was doing mostly painting, and I got these little tiny canvases. I went to the university co-op at the time, and they had some art supplies, and there's little tiny canvases for sale, like $5 each.
How tiny?
They were like 3 inches by 5 inches. I still have them.
That is tiny.
Yeah.
What are they for?
You know, I guess some people like little tiny,
really tiny paintings of
little vignettes
of ants or whatever.
Yes, and
portrait of ants.
Yes, and so I took them, and for some reason, I'm like, oh, I'm gonna put some shoes in here. I would always doodle shoes, like on the margins of my notes. And
but since you were little,
yeah. Well, I think I really can recall it maybe into second grade for some reason. I was maybe around 7 or so. I was just fascinated with witches' shoes, and I remember I would draw witch shoes, you know, with the buckle, brujas. like the buckle, you know, pilgrim shoe, and with the curly toe and all that. And I remember drawing them, you know, and so for some reason, flowers and shoes are always on my margins, but I never connected the dot until those little canvases. And so I drew, the first shoe I drew was this flaming shoe. And I put there, so that I may be reborn. And from there I did these other little series of shoes, but that was the main one. And I called it my phoenix shoe. It didn't look purposely like a bird, but it was, you know, on fire. And so for some reason, to me, it was a phoenix shoe. And so from there, the teacher was like, and the feedback from my colleagues in the class were like, wow, something's clicking with these shoes. You should do more. So I started doing installations, and then they're like, well, start collecting shoes, you know, because you're in art school and you should do all these weird things, right?
Were you already you know, into shoes the way women are into shoes?
No,
you didn't have a collection at home of 37 pairs?
No, and you know, it's so funny. People are like, oh, you have a shoe fetish. I'm like, not at all. You have a foot fetish? Not at all. I hardly purchase shoes. Compared to men.
Was it Imelda Marcos who had like 2,000 pairs of shoes?
Oh my gosh, yes.
Something like that, right?
Yeah. No, never was like that. It was just something about the shoe.
Is there some sort of number that's known that men typically have, you know, 7 pairs and women typically have 15? Is there anything like that? I mean, certainly women typically have more.
Yes.
I think in my own, you know, collection, so to speak, I probably have 8 pairs of shoes.
Yes. And that sounds about right. I don't know the specific numbers now. The last numbers, and they're only for my commercial research when I was working in commercial design, that I know of, is the American market purchased the most shoes worldwide compared to the rest of the world. I think the rest of the world maybe purchases 2 to 3 pair a year. And American market purchases about 7 to 8 pairs a year. So we make up the largest share of people who purchase shoes.
I'm behind.
Yeah. And then there's a big difference between men and women. But I can't say this is very generally speaking, because then you have some men who are very passionate about footwear.
Yeah, I've got a son who's 22, and he's got probably 15 pairs of athletic shoes of various types. He got into that when he was very young, which pained me greatly because he was always getting the $200, $300 sneakers. And
yes, the whole sneakerhead culture was something that I learned about coming into the footwear design education that I was pursuing, which is a whole other story. But great community. I learned a lot from them. And
was that were you in college studying footwear?
So not yet. So what ended up happening, I finished school at UT Austin, and I came back to Brownsville, and I was studying to basically work in the non-for-profit field. I wanted to be a museum director at the time. So I went to work at IMAS, but ended up turning out that I hate asking people for money. Money just makes me so nervous, and it was just not something I enjoyed. And so then I always kind of worked in education in some ways. Then I worked in higher ed, and I started coordinating programs, which I was doing at UT as a student. And so I did that at UTBTSC at the time, career services. And then I taught 2 years because I figured, let me try it out, and tried teaching art at Porter High School. I was there 2 years, and it was fun. But at that time, I was like, you know what? I have a dream. By that time, I was researching the shoes. I had done some shoe art already. So that was like a 4-year span. And so I decided I need to learn shoe design if this is going to go somewhere. And people were already recognizing me for my shoe art, right? I had already showed in some of the galleries. I could even say back at the time, like even with Gabriel, with Art of Brownsville, like that was me. The shoe art was my thing. And so I was like, okay, I'm going to make this real.
Did you have a showing of your shoe art?
Not as in group exhibitions, yes, but never on my own. I finally have had 2 solo art shows, but this was the past 2 years. Cool. But yeah, I decided to research, okay, where do I go learn shoe design? And so in researching these, this was back in 2008. And the option was to go to fashion school, New York or LA, and like get an associate's in fashion design and get into debt like $80,000 or something like that or more. And I was like, okay, there has to be another way. And I started reaching out to people in the industry. And then I came upon this school in Italy. And they had a master's program, and they would take my degree in visual art studies from UT Austin and let me enter the master's program. And
where was this?
This was in Florence.
Yeah, oh, how wonderful.
Yes. But I did my research. I'm like, you know what? So 2008, I decided to go backpacking. I took 2 weeks. So this was the summer between my 2 years of teaching art. And I went by myself, and I went and visited 2 schools in England and 2 schools in...
By yourself?
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, good for you.
Yeah.
This is great for a shy person.
Yes, I guess so. It is. I guess you could say that, but I don't know.
That's why I say you're not really shy. You're quiet.
I guess so. No, I don't know. That's.
But you were brave enough to go on your own.
I don't know why. It didn't scare me. I'm like, I'm going to do this, right? Traveling doesn't scare me.
There's this woman named Marilyn Savant who has the highest IQ recorded.
Yeah.
And she used to do a column for papers and everything. Someone once asked her, they said, how can I come to know myself? And she said, travel alone. Travel alone.
Yes.
And so what did you come to know about yourself when you traveled alone?
Oh,
to Italy.
Well, jet lag is real.
Yeah, that's a good one.
And just funny memories. You have to laugh at yourself. You can't take yourself too seriously, because traveling alone, studying alone, living in another country alone, like you're going to make a lot of mistakes. You're going to make a lot of miscommunications.
It's the price of travel.
Yes.
You're going to make mistakes.
I say jet lag was real because I remember, like, I'm going to ride one of those double-decker buses in London, and I went and got on top of it. And I fell asleep on the top. I don't know how long I was asleep for. And then I wake up and I'm like in the middle of London somewhere. I was like, oh my gosh. And so that was my first real true experience with jet lag. I went and studied abroad in college in Italy. So I had been to Italy before. And I guess that was it kind of took away the nerves. I'm like, okay, I've been there before. I can do it. And so, but yeah, that was just learning to laugh at yourself and being okay with your being clumsy, or I think that's the most important thing I took away from that.
And then you went to the school in Florence, or
yes.
at least you.
So then I visited too in England, and then I hopped a plane and stopped in France to visit from friends, and then I went over to Italy. And so I went to visit the school in Florence and one in Rome. And the one in Florence was open. Well, both of them were open, but I was just so impressed with Florence. Florence is a beautiful city.
Yeah. Everybody's impressed with Florence.
Yes. And
Mark Twain used to go there and spend his summers in Florence. I think he spent like 5 years there.
Yes. It's been a while. I think the last time I've been there was now 2014. Okay. And I even dreamt about it last night. It's funny. But
did you live with someone there, or did you
yes.
rent a place, or how did that work?
So what ended up happening, I settled on the school, but even then I thought, you know what, let me take a summer course. So I went back to summer 2009 and I enrolled in that school for their summer courses. And so I ended up looking up on Craigslist. Like, this was back, I mean, not that long ago, 2009, but that was what you did. You went onto Craigslist, and I saw a posting for a room. So I rented a room from a lady. Now she's a friend, Christina, and she lived not quite in the center of Florence, but enough for me to be able to catch a bus or catch the train to get to the center. And so, yeah, I rented a room for her for like 8 weeks. Mm-hmm. I was there for the summer. And it was enough experience for me. I took a footwear design course. I took fashion profiles course, and they took us to visit tanneries. And
so it was enough for you to say, yes, I want to do a degree here.
It was just so fun.
Yeah.
And eye-opening. Yeah. And it just felt like, okay, this is it. So my plan was, okay, I'm going to come back for my master's. And it took me a while, but I went back in October 2010. And it took me 9 months to finish the master's program.
Now, Italians are famous for shoes.
Yes.
I mean, as a culture.
Yes.
What are they doing that's different from other parts of the world, so to speak? What are they doing that's in their tradition that made you say, no wonder the Italian shoes cost so much, because they're good in these ways?
I think it's just the artisanal quality of what mm-hmm. they do. And then they're known for their luxury footwear and being at the pinnacle of creativity. And it really is a very competitive thing. I'm because I remember going to the fairs, one of the fairs that they had in Florence. So Prato is like a suburb. I don't want to say suburb. I'm going to offend an Italian from Prato, saying that Prato is a suburb of Florence, but it's nearby. And they're known for their textile industry. So they have a big textile fair in Florence called Pitti Filati. And so I remember one of the owners of one of the companies that they make textiles in Prato saying, they're like, we always have to be on the forefront of having the most unique things, the most beautiful things ahead of everybody else, because there's always going to come up someone after us and they're going to copy it. And yes, I mean, fashion is always some iteration of a trend. Yeah. If you're going to be doing something new every season, it's going to get very expensive and you might not be able to sell it. So they're like, we always have to be on the top of doing something new and unique. But not only that.
Were you working with both men's and women's shoes?
So when I was in Florence, I did an internship after I finished my degree. I went to, because Italy has its regions, where they have manufacturing for footwear. So I ended up going to a region called Marche. It's along the Adriatic coast. I always tell people it's right on the calf of the boot of Italy. Yeah. And so there's
I like that you pointed out that Italy is in the shape of a boot, so naturally they're great at footwear. Yes,
I always pick up my leg and I point right at the middle of my calf, like, that's where I was. And they're like, oh, okay. And people know exactly where I was working. It's a little town called Civitanova Marche. It's like a town of maybe 4,000 people, but they have a lot of factories in the area.
And to me, you pronounce Italian very well.
Thank you. Well, the Spanish helps.
I'm sure.
And it's funny enough, like I'm able to pronounce the Italian correctly, but they still would catch on. They're like, oh, your accent is Latin American. I'm like, okay. I'm like, yeah, I guess so. Like, then they knew that it wasn't an Italian accent.
But there are a lot of cognates, right, from Spanish to Italian, where you kind of get the core element of the meaning.
Yes. If I got lost or something, I could probably get by on my Spanish all right. So, but yeah, I did my work there, and it was in women's luxury. So I was doing an internship with a design studio. I wasn't in the factory, but we just spent all day drawing, coming up with different concepts. And then...
Did they take any of your designs and develop them?
I think they would eventually develop some of my concepts into something else. One of the brands that I was designing for with the studio, because they basically, this design studio was being hired by other brands. Sure. But I think I saw a buckle that I designed, which I learned that I didn't learn accessory design at all or hardware design at all in school. But in my internship, they're like, oh, design this accessory, design this buckle. So I came up with this buckle idea where the leather was kind of looping in and out of it. And so later on, I saw an iteration of that with that brand. It was called, it's still called Alberto Gozzi. And so, yeah, I saw the buckle kind of turn the other way. Mm-hmm. And so I was like, oh, that's my concept.
That's wonderful. Yeah. It must have felt good.
Yeah, it does. It was.
So your work hit the market.
Yes. And then it's funny, for like all the designs you do, you have to grow some very thick skin in design, and you have to, and even more so when you're doing product development, like maybe even less than 10%, maybe 5% of what you do from all the concepts and all the work that you do moves forward. It's like a process. You end up with the concept stage is a very wide field, and later it just starts getting refined until you have that one little idea. And so everything else just starts getting chopped off or, edited or done away with, or it seems like it's almost at the market and then it's like done away with, and so you have to not take things personally. That was a hard lesson, when you're a young designer, but now I'm just like, okay. But
So does a shoe begin with a logo, and then you design the shoe around the logo? Does it begin with just a tiny concept that you amplify, or do you begin with the total concept and try to build elements of the concept in every dimension of the shoe?
It just depends on the brief. Mm-hmm. So it depends. When I was with my shoe art, or let's say in fashion school, so school is very different than the actual real world of working, of course.
Always is.
But you can come in, or if you're working super high luxury, right? So you're working Prada, or some very avant-garde brands like, let's say Alexander McQueen, or some of the Northern European brands, where it's just crazy. You can come up with anything, right? And it's great. Even though they'll probably just make like 24 pairs and they'll sell like for thousands of dollars, but they can do that, right? So then you can come up with, they taught me one of my teachers in school came up with some fun exercises where like take magazine pieces and see what you can come up with, or take drawings. Like when I was in Italy there studying, like 1 month of just pure research. We didn't draw a single shoe. Mm-hmm. We were just absorbing the culture, seeing what concepts or ideas we can come up with. So,
every art form has rules.
Yes.
They have sayings they go by, dichos, so to speak, for design. What are some of those? Here are the do's and here are the don'ts. You never do X. You always do this.
It depends. So, it's so funny. So that I'm going to jump forward. I finished my internship, and then eventually my first professional job, I started in 2013, was working for San Antonio Shoes, or SAS. And I was in San Antonio, and I worked for them a little over 5 years. And
that's interesting. I've seen SAS, but I didn't know it meant San Antonio
yes,
shoes.
and not a lot of people know that.
Yeah.
And I grew up calling it SAS.
SAS, yeah.
And then when I saw they had an opening, I started reaching out to them. They're like, oh, San Antonio shoes, or they say SAS there, you know. So that was like, ooh, reframing my concept of them.
So you went to work as a designer for them?
Yes. Okay. And it was a great education because I was actually in the factory. And so the development process, I got to see everything happen. Whereas, you know, you're in a design studio, you just turn in a design, and if it gets made or not made, you don't know until later. Whereas here, I learned not just to design, but I also did development, the product development. So I was pushing my babies forward, like working with the engineers. So going back to that concept of the rules. And you'll have this tug of war. I don't know if you ever heard of that. Then there's like podcasts on this, design versus engineer. And so the designers are to push on a concept. It's kind of like architect versus engineer. Yes. You know, you want to be as creative as possible. You want to think outside the box, but then there are rules to follow.
The engineer says that's not possible.
Yes, exactly. and so as you gain experience, you're like, you learn, okay, I can't put this seam there because it is going to hurt the little toe. You know, especially if you're working in comfort footwear. Or I can't put this there. Or I need to cut this leather piece, this part of the shoe, into different pieces because that's going to be one giant piece of leather. And the leather itself, the height of the cow, just like us, we're wobbly in some bits and firmer in other bits. Same thing with the cow. So you can't treat it like it's dough when you're cutting the different parts of the shoe, depending if it's on the vamp versus the counter. So you have to learn all these rules on how the shoe needs to come together.
And were the San Antonio shoes actually made in San Antonio?
Yes. Yeah? And in Del Rio as well.
It's unusual to have, in modern America, to have the product made in America.
Very unusual. And that's something I'm actually very proud of. Yeah. So I've worked in American manufacturing twice now. I've done it with San Antonio shoes, and then I did here in the Valley, Rios and Mercedes. And this is another, I do know that 1% of the footwear worn by Americans today is actually made in the United States.
Wow, just 1%.
Yeah. The lead, of course, right now, I don't know if you can give a guess, which is like 58, 57% is, can you give a guess? What country?
I would guess China.
Yes.
Probably.
Yes.
Yeah.
So China.
Korea, perhaps.
China, and actually China's starting to lose some of that market share to countries like Vietnam, Cambodia, because it's getting cheaper to go to those countries now. And so, yeah, to have American manufacturing is...
Yeah, because the labor costs in China are probably somewhere around maybe $2 an hour for labor.
I would imagine, yes.
Maybe less. And here, what is it going to be? 9, 10 at a minimum?
At the minimum, yes. And then it goes up. And so...
And then you have to get the labor that's skilled enough to do that work.
That's very difficult. Both in San Antonio and here at Rios Mercedes, not just getting the labor or getting the skills and bringing up these artisanal skills, maintaining and retaining them. It's hard. It's hard work. You're on your feet.
So how old are these people generally who are making them, who are doing the...
So right now, from my experience, from working in both factories, and I would say they both they're both kind of working with the same demographics, largely Mexican or Mexican American workers in San Antonio and Mercedes. What I noticed was it was a mixture, but it was because there were families. So it's almost like a legacy. So you would have tío, tía, uncle, aunt, grandma, grandpa, dad, like 3 generations working in the same factory. And so it was like something carried forward. And so I think that's why you would see.
So some of them were kind of like in a familial apprenticeship.
Yes.
Learning how to do this stuff.
Yes, right? Exactly. And so that's how I think it's still surviving in the United States, but it is very difficult.
What is the difference in the way that, say, boots are made and your luxury shoes? Do they use a better leather or stronger? What's the difference?
The major difference is the leather. Of course, the construction. Boots will have, a welt construction, and they have to be very durable. But the leather you need to be using unless it's like a high fashion women's, now cowboy boots have entered like the high fashion or women's fashion circle now. But if you're using this to ride horses, you need to use a much thicker leather. And
so you got the work boots and your
yes,
stylish boots.
Yes.
And then you've got those ones with the big curly toes that are the,
yes.
the nautical boots.
Yes, that was so funny. I remember the first class I took in Italy in 2009. Our teacher showed us a video of those Mexicans in Tamaulipas with the big curly boots, and they're using tires to make the soles.
Oh, really?
And I was like, oh my gosh! Like I feel like I'm watching something from home, and I'm here in Florence.
The first time I ever saw those was on Breaking Bad.
Yes,
they had the what do you call them? Sicarios, is that right? The assassins.
Oh, I'm not too sure. Yeah.
They were the two assassins. They wore those boots. That's the first time I saw them.
Yes. No, it's funny how culturally, and you'll see this here, the difference between the Mexican consumer versus the American consumer. And so the American consumer is going to want more of that square toe, a double welt, and whereas the Mexican consumer, and I'm talking very broadly here,
sure. Yes.
It's a much more European influence. It's they want a slimmer, more sophisticated profile to their footwear.
Did you see in Italy? Did you see a lot of what we would call Western boots?
At the time when I was there, it was kind of coming into the fashion foray little by little. And so I would see it in fashion magazines, but I really didn't see people walking around with cowboy boots.
Well, it's really interesting because, you have back in the 60s and 70s, I guess primarily 60s, you had what they call the spaghetti westerns.
Yes.
And so you had this great influence where those films were filmed in Italy.
Yes.
And so there was a great connection between Italy and American westerns.
Yes.
Even the music was made.
Yes.
By what is his name? Morcione. I can't get his
yes,
name. Yes,
I know. Recall who you're talking about.
He wrote the what's the word I'm looking for? Anyway, he wrote the music for these films.
Yes.
Hang 'Em High and Good, Bad, and the Ugly and all that sort of thing. The Clint Eastwood westerns. So I was just wondering, if that legacy had continued on with the celebration of American westerns and footwear in Italy.
So I haven't been there lately, so I'm not sure how this Western trend, because I've witnessed it, and especially working in the Western industry, which was this whole other education there. I would see how they absorbed it. I'm not too sure. I would imagine they did some point, but I did get to see there is a cowboy culture in Italy. And they call them, in northern Tuscany, there's a region there, and I can't recall the name of the region right now, but they have their version of a cowboy called buttero.
Buttero.
Yeah, so it's spelled Buttero. So we would want to say buttero, but most Italian words, the emphasis is right away in the first syllable, so buttero. And there's actually a women's and men's brand, a fashion brand called Buttero, and so it kind of had these Western elements to it, but still translated for the Italian market. But their boots weren't like our Western boots. They were more like the equestrian boots. So they were like these tall equestrian boots when they're out there on their horses in the Tuscan countryside herding sheep. And so it is a very proud tradition in Italy, the buttero culture.
Here's the name. Maybe you can say.
Oh, yes, Ennio Morricone. I'm not sure how to say it.
Yeah. He wrote all the music for those, and it's a very famous music. Even this day, you'll hear it almost.
Maybe it's the
the whistling has the whistling in it, and you hear it as a meme in a lot of places in the background. So,
or you see the tumbleweed fly by.
You see the tumbleweed. But there was a place they even built in Italy called Fort Texas.
Oh.
It's where they filmed all of these westerns.
Wow. Well, that must have been fun.
It's still there.
Okay. I'm learning now.
It's in the desert region where it looks kind of like El Paso.
Yes.
Around that area. So that's why they filmed there. So very interesting. And of course, that's almost 50 years ago now. So, as you know, fashion changes.
Yes.
But I imagine in that time that the Western boot was probably very popular in Italy as well as here.
Yes, I'm pretty sure. But yeah, I would need to go back now with my new understanding, because you learn something and then your eyes open and you see it everywhere, you know? So
now you're wanting to do your own shoe line.
Yes.
Right?
So I want to take my shoe art and make it into a real shoe. I have my own little studio right now that I have a little house in downtown Brownsville. Eventually I want to get into machinery and just kind of make prototypes. I won't make anything that can be worn, but at least like a 3D sculptural thing, to kind of bring my 3D, my 2D shoe art drawings to life. Because that's the first thing. I sell prints of my shoe art, and I'll sell them for like $10, you know, at fairs or things like that. Or when,
with this shoe line, is this, are these boots? Are these women's shoes or both?
It could be whatever it needs to be. And so I think that's the question. I'm going to take one of my designs and get a prototype made. I've already kind of sent out inquiry feelers out into see where I can get them made. At least a prototype. Figure out how much it's going to cost once that prototype is made to have more made. And from there, I should be able to kind of determine my business model. And
I heard a speech by the guy Tom, who started Tom's Shoes.
Yes.
And he went down to Argentina, I believe it was Argentina, and he found a family who could make his shoes. Kind of like you were talking about in the family that,
yes.
You know, from 10 to 90, they knew how to make shoes. So he hired them to start doing the original work. He had a simple shoe design and a interesting model, marketing model. So that's how he started. And then it obviously blew up into something much, much bigger. But maybe that's a model for you, is to get your prototype made, and then maybe through the connections you already have, you can find a way to
yes.
Get them. And maybe Elon Musk is listening and he can underwrite your idea and, go on Shark Tank.
Yes. Well, we'll see, like, the whole business model, what it looks like. People, you're going to start your own company, they ask me. Or are you going to go work for this and that? I don't know yet. To be honest, like, I'm more interested in the artistry.
In the art part.
My shoe art is very esoteric. And so when it's esoteric and unique, and it doesn't lend itself to being commercial. And
so where can we see it?
Well, right now do
you have a website where we can look at it?
I'm on Facebook and on Instagram. You can find me under Mayra Cruz Art Design. There's no and between art and design. And that's MAYRACRUZ, Art Design. And you can see examples of my work there. And I had 2 solo art shows, and I was like, okay, I got to keep pushing myself to make this real. Because I can fall into the trap of getting very comfortable and say, oh, okay, well, I've got this cushy job, or I can do this forever and just work full-time all day and then come home, and just live a comfortable life. But then my own art won't ever get pushed anywhere.
They say that if you want to be a writer, you have to write every day. Do you have to design every day?
I should be
doodling.
I should be, but also you don't want to burn out on it as well. So you should be doing, and I say should be, I'm not the best at doing it.
But you don't have to be doing shoes every day.
No.
You can just design a beautiful flower or whatever.
And exactly. And that's why I didn't want to put shoe and art design. I didn't want to limit myself just to shoes because, again, my original background is art.
Yeah.
And I think if I ever get tired of shoes, if I want to do something else, I don't want to keep myself in that little mold. And that's why I think I'm more interested in artistry versus being a commercial designer or having a commercial line. Because once you go commercial, you're put in that little mold, and it's very hard to step outside of that and continue to be commercial and successful in that model. Or people know your brand DNA, right? So let's say all of a sudden, even though Nike bought Converse, but if Converse starts changing their silhouette, and they have been changing their silhouette, but the key features of that upper design is still key to that, right? But if all of a sudden Converse starts trying to put a name and say, have something similar to like the Air Jordan, but you know, like the Air Jordan silhouette versus the Converse silhouette, people are going to be like, that doesn't make sense. That's Air Jordan or that's something else. And so the whole brand DNA thing is true. It's a real thing. And so, yeah, I think I don't want to necessarily limit myself to something. And
you
so
get
that's
trapped by that.
Yes. So we'll see. Right now, the whole thing for me is just to be as creative as possible and just move forward from there. And I do want to be able to travel and get inspired and be able to sit down and say, okay, I'm just going to do this and not worry about, oh, is this going to sell? Because that's the thing. The brief is everything. If I'm working for a comfort footwear design or I'm working in Western industry, I have to study. I need to know the market and I need to know what's going to sell. And so that design is very purposeful and there's parameters to meet. And I don't want to limit my artistry to certain parameters, if that makes any sense.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely makes sense. But I hope that you will get to do your designs in real life, so to speak, to produce your own line of shoes, because it would be interesting for me, having interviewed you, to say, and I bought her shoes.
Oh, thank you. So, yeah, that's what people always ask me. They're like, they'll get my shoe art or they'll buy it or see it. And they're like, where can I buy it?
Yeah.
Where's the shoe? That's
Where's
the first thing
shoe?
they ask me. I'm like, it doesn't exist. Like, sorry. I have to learn how to get it made. Or like, are you going to make it? Can you make it? I'm like, you don't want me making your shoe.
Well, maybe through a GoFundMe model, because that's what people do. They say, if you will make this shoe, I will underwrite it. And so they invest in GoFundMe for the idea that they would one day get a copy of the shoes they have seen in your art.
Yes.
So, and GoFundMe surprises people.
Yes.
You lay out a good plan and people get inspired by that plan, and suddenly you got $100,000 to work with. It can be.
Oh gosh, surprise. I wouldn't even know what it is. That makes me again the whole money thing. Like I get nervous. But no, and I get nervous not because I feel the responsibility of it, and that's why I'm like, oh my gosh.
That's why you hire,
and I freeze.
You hire a financial expert to handle that part, so that you can design.
Yes. Okay. I hope that. When that time comes, like God would be like, oh, here's that person that's going to help you. So you have the freedom to create.
Well, it's been delightful hearing your story.
Thank you.
And a wonderful life you've lived to this point, studying abroad, studying in Italy at the heart of great fashion, is particularly for shoes.
Thank you.
You must feel very grateful that you've been blessed in this way.
I am very grateful. And so.
Thanks for coming in. Appreciated meeting you.
Thank you. Likewise.
Thanks for watching this BSPA video. Go ahead and hit like and subscribe if you like what you see. And if you really like what you see, go ahead and go to our website, brosoperformingarts.org, and smash the donate button. And then we'll really like you too.